All right, just finished up that episode with Nick from Ember Webs. Obviously, we talk a little bit about development and building websites and all that fun stuff, but there are some other things in there that I think are beneficial for you to listen to. So check it out. Let me know what you think of the episode. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast because there are a ton of you that listen and are still not subscribed. And it kind of makes me feel bad. So, subscribe and have a great day. Enjoy the episode. Hello, and welcome to episode number 34 of the After Hours podcast. Here with me today, I have the founder and CEO of Ember Webs, Nick Teters. Thanks for coming on, Nick. I'm pretty excited to get to this episode. I haven't really talked to a dev or anything like that recently, or at all, actually, on the podcast. So this should be a pretty insightful episode.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Happy to be here, and thanks for having me on.
Cool. Awesome. So I guess, let's start off with a little bit of an intro. What Ember Webs is, what you do on your, maybe not into all that. We'll get into that later on, but, basically what Ember Webs is, how long ago you started it, and the kind of, opening type stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. We, Ember Webs currently designs and develops custom websites for esports organizations and e-commerce businesses. We started up at the end of 2014 in October, and we worked with brands all across esports, including Arma, Gamer Grip, Soar, Obey, Team Envious, Team Caliber. So, we've run the gamut in the esports industry, and we've also worked with bigger businesses outside of esports as well.
Awesome. Yeah, obviously. So I didn't know you guys started in 2014. Ironically, October of 2014, because that's when esports apparel at the time, now Sector 6, started. So very similar timing. So I think that's super interesting.
Yes, sir.
So we've definitely been around the block, to say the least.
Yep.
So I guess to jump right into it, what does the kind of the from 0 to 100 process look like at Ember Webs? Would you either someone reaches out to you or you reach out to get that process started? What exactly does that kind of look like if someone's interested in getting a website started up?
Yeah, right now a good majority of our business is word of mouth. So typically we'll have an introduction from a previous client or a mutual connection, and so they'll set the meeting, and we'll go in, determine what the needs of the client are, and let them know how we can assist them. And then once the project is green lighted, then essentially what we do is we design the homepage of the site and deliver a rough draft to the client and get their notes just to make sure we're on the same page still and going in the right direction. We take those notes, create a final draft of the homepage, and then once that is approved, then we go into designing the rest of the site, again passing it back and forth between us and the client so we can get their feedback. And then once that is completed, then we go into development, and pretty much from there, that's where I take it and develop the entire thing. And then once we finish developing the site, we show the client how to use it. And most of our sites are self-managed, because it's just me essentially. I am having a couple new partners that will be announced soon, but for this last 4 or 5 years, it's been just me, and then some contracted work with some web designers that are quite honestly much better than me at web design.
Cool. So I guess you mentioned that it's, I guess the probably the goal is for the website to be self-managed. Is that the goal, or does it just kind of naturally flow that way? Is that was that always your main focus?
Yeah, typically I wouldn't set up a site where it's a situation where they'd have to contact me every time they needed to make changes, because then I would be encumbered with those type of small changes, and things like that. Managing a website is a pretty day-to-day thing, so you could imagine how out of hand that would get
Oh yeah.
if I had 10, 15, 20 clients that were hitting me up every day for changes to the site. I wouldn't have time for any new business.
So, so do you do any work where you are the point of contact and the main website manager, or do you just totally avoid it?
Yeah, there is a couple.
Okay.
There is a couple, and really more recently. So there's a business in Missouri that I do most of their website management, and then we have two new clients, EMGG, which is a content creator network.
Yep.
We do a lot of work for them on a pretty consistent basis, and then also the Elite, who we announced earlier this year as well. Will be managing their site as well.
Cool. That's awesome. That's awesome. Now, back in 2014, when you were like, I want to start this company, what was going through your mind? Where was the mindset? What made you even think about doing it? Kind of
Mhm.
walk me through a little bit through that. Because personally, I love origin stories. So
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing better than an origin story, honestly. 2014, my wife and I were expecting our third child, and because of the expenses that go along with that and daycare, especially, we decided that she was going to stay home full time with the kids. So there was a need to replace her salary. And esports at the time was very much in its infancy.
Hmm.
And as I looked around, even at some of the major organizations, a lot of them either didn't have a site, or it was, pretty poor quality or very basic, to say the least. So I just kind of saw an opportunity where nobody was really paying attention to esports at that time. I saw the opportunity of a growing industry that had not been tapped yet. And so, I started hitting up some of the connections that I had created over the years in the industry. And turns out a lot of them had been looking for sites for a long time. And, it kind of took off from there. I believe we started with Arma Centrum first. That was the first site that I created. And then, it spiraled from there. Soar was next, I believe, and then Team Envious. And then, of course, when you do work for a client the size of Team Envious, that generates a lot of buzz uh, pretty early on in the origin of the company.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Now, when you came into the space, was there, or I presume you were in the space prior, but like when Ember Webs came into the scene, was there any immediate competition from the get, or was it like, it was literally open season for you?
The primary competition at the time was a business called Esportsify.
All right.
I believe that company has since ceased working. I think they just moved on to other things, but they were doing pre-made sites. But as far as custom websites, we were one of the only, if not the only, business specifically targeting esports organizations.
Now, like, I guess since we're on that topic of like competition, if you fast forward to now, have you seen over the past six some odd years, um, companies popping up and trying to do similar? Are there people in the space doing similar, whether it's on their own or behind a company or whatever? What does that competition look like now?
The two primary competitors that I've seen over the years is either an independent person, so somebody that's just a freelancer that would do it for a lot cheaper than I would. So there's a lot of competition there, a lot of price shopping and things like that. And then the other would be league mandatory league sites. So a team or organization would join a league that had sites that were standard for every team in the league. So they would have to essentially go with that person instead of a custom site. That's been our primary competitor over the years.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess that makes sense. But I mean, the way it sounds is like it still feels pretty open season for you. You mentioned that you do a lot of your business comes to you via word of mouth. How much, like I guess on a weekly or maybe monthly basis, how much outreach are you doing to like to bring in new clientele, or do you at all? Because based on your workload, I'm not, I'm just trying to wrap my head around that.
Yeah, as far as marketing and things like that, we
Yeah.
do use social media to try and get our name out there. We do have strategic partnerships with some organizations like Elevate and E United, and they'll bring clients to us. But other than that, it's strictly word of mouth business. We are also registered Shopify experts. So Shopify has a little expert marketplace where essentially a client can go and fill out a form of what they need, and then based on those needs, they'll match them with a expert, and that's where we drum up a lot of our e-commerce business. So I'll typically field between 3 and 5 requests a day from that, and then I would say at least a couple clients a week. Come to us. The sites take about 4 to 6 weeks to put together, so we're very particular at this point about who we onboard as clients because it's only me right now.
Yeah.
So there's only so much that I can intake without giving 3 4 month
Waits.
runways for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, so I guess you said four. I think you said 4 to 6 weeks. Now is that the average? Is that like best case scenario? Like if I reached out to you today,
Mhm.
I have no brand presence. You have to learn my brand and all that. And I want to put together a website for an esports team that's going to have shop functionality. What does that typically look like? Assuming I'm not super picky and I like the first
Yeah.
thing you do.
Yeah, if everything goes smoothly, 4 to 6 weeks is
Okay.
pretty standard. Um, and sometimes you got to factor in it takes a little bit to even set the initial consultation,
Hmm.
and then feedback going back and forth. It can be slow at times, and then coding and development is always sort of a dice roll.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes things go awry, but typically our standard project is at about 6 weeks right now.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. And not ever having a website professionally done, I can't say I've ever like been able to judge what that sounds like, but to me, it makes sense.
Yeah.
I always stand behind good quality. Takes a little bit of time because if it didn't take that much time, most people would just do it themselves. Um,
Right. Yeah.
so, um, but yeah. So let's bring it back to before the start of Ember Webs. We're a little all over the place this episode, so just kind of bear with me. Um, when did you first start coding?
So I started out really as a designer, graphic designer. I went by Pixels to Life at the very beginning of my career. Whenever I joined the Twitter community, so I started out as Pixels to Life, did graphic design and things like that, and then eventually switched over to Pixel Professor, which is a name just kind of presented itself organically. People would say, you're a wizard at design, or stuff like that. And
Hmm.
also, I was very much about giving advice and things like that, so people would often refer to me as professor or teacher. So whenever I started with Pixel Professor, I eventually landed which at the time was one of the most coveted positions, which is um, uh, creative director over at Red Reserve, which was owned by Phase at the time.
Right.
And that's when I really gained popularity, because everybody at that point, is trying to get at you. I'm sure you've experienced some of this yourself as Sector 6 has grown. And even back in the esports apparel days, there was probably a lot of people that were hitting you up that weren't before, once you started to see some success. So there was a point, though, after I got that position that I realized that there was a lot of competition in the design space,
Hmm.
and there was almost nobody in the community doing development work. Some guys had started to do a little bit of web design stuff, like Travis from Creative Grenade. He's always dabbled in the web design stuff and is very, very talented. But there really wasn't very many other people, and that's just kind of the personality that I have. If I see a void or a hole that I can jump into, or I feel I have the skill set to fulfill. I love learning new stuff and jumping into it. So I taught myself how to write HTML and CSS. I got a development job here locally in my city, building real estate investor websites. It's a completely random niche, but it helped build my skill set and using HTML and CSS every day so that I could improve as a developer. So that was my main reasoning for taking the job.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. Weird random niche or not, it makes sense. It gives you the experience that you need.
Yep.
And it keeps you, I guess, well, for one, it pays you, and for two, it keeps you on your toes, I guess. You don't ever disconnect from the comfortability of working with code. It's not like just something you're doing every other week or whatever. So it keeps
Right.
you efficient, I guess is the best word I was looking for. Um,
Yeah.
my biggest thing, I've never actually put my mind to learning code, but every time, like, we operate on Shopify too, so every time I open up
Hmm.
the code section of the back end, and I get lost. So, like, how do you manage, like, learning how to read code? Like, what I guess, without giving me a lesson on it, like, how did you justify putting yourself through learning that? And I guess, what would be a piece of advice you could give somebody who's trying to teach themselves code, how to read and write code?
It all depends on what type of learner you are.
Okay.
So some people like to take a class, like a traditional class where you go in and there's a group of people and a teacher and they're teaching you specific things and skills and things like that. Some people like myself are more visual learners. So what I did whenever I first started out is I would go on tutorial websites like Linda and things,
Hmm.
and just take the courses, just listen to the instructor and code while they were coding, and just kind of, it's almost like building muscle memory, like with gaming or sports. You're just building that muscle memory and just learning through repetition, and experimentation as well. So that's really how I learned, is just doing it over and over and over. And it's kind of like learning a language like Spanish or English or whatever. It is its own language. So once you get the nuances, a lot of languages build on each other because they're based loosely off other languages.
Hmm.
So as you start picking up these different languages, you start seeing the similarities, and then you start learning the languages faster because you already have the foundation of the other ones that you've learned. So it's kind of fun, and there's new languages popping up all the time. Developers are always coming up with new innovative ways to do new things and improve upon things that are already established.
So, speaking of uh, like, different languages now, um, does Shopify have its own, or is it like a? Because I know nothing about different coding languages. Does Shopify
Mhm.
operate on like a mix of a few different ones, or is it its own language?
So Shopify has its own language. It's called Liquid,
Okay.
and it's loosely based off of JavaScript. And then, of course, you also have to be able to know how to write HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Hmm.
but you don't have to know any of the back end type stuff like Python or anything like that, because that's what Shopify is. It's a content management system. So the back end coding is taken care of for you. So all you need to know is front end development, which is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then Liquid, which is Shopify's, primary code base to hook everything up, your products and blogs and things like that.
Right. Now, with building websites, how creative can you be when you're writing the code on the back end? Or I guess what I'm asking is, when you build everything, it's very like, I don't know the program. It's probably not Photoshop, but assume it's in Photoshop, and then you recreate it in the code. Is that typically how that looks, or if it's not, what does it look like?
So we use a program called Sketch.
Okay.
It has similarities to Photoshop, and Adobe has its own Adobe program called InDesign as
Right.
well, that a lot of people in the industry use. But essentially, what we do is we'll have somebody design the website out. And usually the specifications and functionality come from the client. So we'll design something out, and we kind of know our limitations as far as what we can do with Shopify and other platforms that we work with. So we'll tell the client that up front, and then once the design is approved, I can just take it from its design state and then sort of interpret it into code. um, just using techniques that I know. A lot of the framework for websites is very, very similar. So when you build out the sort of scaffolding, it's like a house, right? There's a foundation and walls and roof. A lot of websites are very, very similar in that regard, and then it's just adding the bells and whistles after that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, I guess this kind of goes a little bit into what I asked before, like what is the time frame between, from beginning to end client side of building a website? What I'm more curious about now, after talking about all this, like how much time do you spend coding to put together a website that you designed, is approved, call it a, maybe not a major catalog or anything, like nothing shop focused, but basically a team website, 3 or 4 teams or whatever. What does it
Mhm.
take time wise to code that, from, I guess, start to finish after the design's approved?
To code your standard esports website, I would say it takes anywhere between 20 and 40 hours
Damn.
of code. Some of them, if you have sites that are very similar to each other or they're smaller, like one page sites, you can knock those out pretty quickly. But I just did a site for a client that I work for full time. That's how much work that they have. Um, but I coded a site for them, and it took me about 6 months to
Damn.
code all of it across their 3 brands that they own. So,
Wow.
depending on the project, it can either be one day or it can take a few weeks. I usually allot 4 weeks time
Mhm.
um, for development.
Now, when you're having that entry conversation or the consultation with a potential client, do you price it? I'm assuming based, like, there's a lot of different things that go into it. You don't just like, yeah, we start at $1,000. That's our base price, and if you have 4 teams, it's this much or whatever. You price it strictly on that consultation, right?
Yeah, it's 100% based on functionality.
Okay.
So if it's stuff that we do all the time, partner pages, about us, contact us, teams, news, recent videos, that kind of stuff is stuff that we do all the time. So there's a base price for that. And then from there, it just builds based on what they want. And a lot also depends on, can I execute their site on Shopify? Because if I can, then that saves me a ton of time doing back end development. Because back end development, if I had to build a site from scratch, which is building a content management system, possibly an e-commerce system, plus all the front end, which is what the people actually see. If I had to build the back end, that's a minimum of 12 weeks to put that all together, and it's very pricey. 10
Yeah.
10k 10k plus.
Oh wow, that makes sense though. It makes sense because
Yeah.
I mean I've only heard horror stories of what that looks like. Maybe
Oh
not
yeah.
horror stories, but like the amount of work that goes into it. And so I guess maybe if we're talking to somebody here who doesn't necessarily know the difference between something completely custom from zero and integrating it to Shopify, what would be the
Mhm.
positive and the negative of doing, like, aside from, like, obviously the negative is going to be time and money, but what would be a
Mhm.
positive and negative for someone who wants to do something literally from zero where they have the back end designed and all that?
So the positive to having something built totally from the ground up is a lot of times you'll save on fees for hosting and things like that. So Shopify and other platforms like Squarespace and Wix and things like that, they have their platforms priced because they did all the initial legwork for you and building out the content management system so that your site is easily updated once it's built. And also, they have built in security. So, obviously, when you're taking private information, particularly payment information, security and privacy is paramount. So, having the reliability of a Shopify or somebody that has a pre-made platform, that is a lot of the cost that you incur on a monthly. So if it's done right, you can build it from scratch, um, and you can save on those fees and things like that later on. It's going to cost you more initially, but over time, it will pay for itself because of not having those fees and things like that. And you just have more creative control. Shopify and other platforms have their limitations of what you can do because it has to work within a system.
Hmm.
So if you build something completely from scratch, the possibilities are endless. You can do whatever you want with those. So, the big positives are customization, total control of the platform. You don't have to rely on the platform not failing. So, if Shopify were to go under, there'd be a lot of people's businesses that would suffer big time. I'm sure your business would take a big hit if you all of a sudden didn't have Shopify.
Oh
So,
yeah.
there is the security and the fact that you own the site, and everything on it is proprietary to you. So, that's the big positive to it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess I never thought about it past the fact that there's a lot of work to it and a lot of maintenance. And when I
Hmm.
hear work and maintenance, I think money.
Yep.
And because I will never, I don't think I'll ever be able to pick up code at the level that somebody who does this full time, and just I feel like I can get in the back end of Shopify and understand what XYZ does, but
Hmm.
to go and make a edit in something that's entirely from ground up, I could never. I would have to, you know, have somebody full time to do that because that would make me so nervous.
Yeah. Yeah, you would definitely have to have somebody there to manage the site, even if it's just in case something goes wrong. You would want to have somebody, basically on call that could fix any potential issues that could arise.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Now I guess to bring it back to the present, what what does 2020 look for Ember Webs? What are your current goals? What are expansion kind of conversations you're having internally? What is the rest of, I know we're very early into the year, so what does the rest of 2020
Mhm.
kind of look like for you?
Yeah, so I always love a new year because it just kind of feels like it's opening up the possibilities on what you can do, and everybody's kind of rejuvenated. And for me, myself, as a creative, it's great because the businesses that we work for are also going through that whole, okay, new year, new me kind of thing. So it kind of organically drums up a lot of business.
Hmm.
So this year we're looking to increase profits, which we have every year by 30%, or at least 30%. And we're looking to expand into two new areas of business. So right now we've been focused on esports and e-commerce. So we'll be expanding into two new markets this year.
Nice.
Um, we're going to be adding at least two new employees and possibly up to 10 this year, depending on how things work out. Um, and that's just kind of our focus this year. And I really am also going to be starting a sort of a side project as sort of a passion project,
Ooh,
um,
I like that.
that will be coming up soon. It's not like super secret or anything like that. Basically, as we discussed before, I started out in the design industry, and I'm always big on remembering where you came from.
Hmm.
So as a way to sort of give back to the design community, which helped me get to the place that I am now, I'm starting up a sort of side business to help designers connect with clients, and generate business for them, via social media and things like that. So, my primary focus will be connecting people who need work done with reliable people in the industry that do graphic design, apparel, for you guys, logos, web design, all that type of stuff. I want to help build up some of these designers that have either been around for a while or just coming up, help drum up some business for them. So that is sort of a side passion project for myself in 2020.
That's awesome. I mean, I as somebody who I definitely don't consider myself still a designer, but I came kind of up in the design community. I had been around a
Hmm.
bunch of people. I've always been very attached to it. So I think that's great because I do remember being a freelance designer is always super super hard. Um, Short of scrolling through your Twitter search of like people who tweet need graphics or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
there was no other way for someone coming into the scene to get new work kind of consistently unless they were just consistently tweeting out graphics for some big streamer, and eventually it catches and the streamer likes it and they retweet it and they help you out. But
Hmm.
I think that's great. I'm super excited to see what happens there. So stay tuned for that. um,
Hmm.
Now, I guess I mean obviously, so past 2020, do you have any like end goal plans with Ember Webs or like maybe you personally or anything like that?
The goal for Ember Webs is to be the number one provider for esports companies and organizations. Into the future, I would like to work with leagues and things like that, like the Call of Duty League or the Overwatch League, or any number of leagues that I'm sure will quickly pop up as these others continue to develop.
Hmm.
So that is a big thing, and also in the future of Ember Webs, I hope that it will be something where our name is synonymous with esports and the sort of come up of esports, right? There's a lot of companies that are doing it already, like G Fuel, and we want to be right there at the forefront of the esports movement because it's very very young still,
Oh yeah.
and there's a lot of companies that could benefit from our service, and we want to help the industry as a whole grow, not just ourselves, but the industry as a whole grow, because I've been a gamer my entire life. My new partners that I'm bringing on, they've been gamers for their entire life and competitive gamers. So we all want to see the industry as a whole succeed. And, based on the skill sets that I have and my partners have, this is the best way we know how to help.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. You know, I can't say I'm a OG in the scene because the esports community has been around a while,
Hmm.
long enough that that definitely longer than I've been in it, obviously.
Yeah.
So by no means can I say that, but in the time that I have been, both on this side of it, the working side of it, and on the interested outside looking in side of it, it's just been super super fun to just watch it grow, and I feel like year after year, the angle that it tilts back to go up, it just keeps getting more straight up versus like plateauing. And
Hmm.
each year I feel like it's going to plateau, and 1 month out of the year I feel like I get a little nervous that there's going to be a plateau, the quote unquote the bubble's going to burst. I keep hearing that, and it might happen, but at the same time, year over year there's still all these crazy interesting things that are happening. People are
Yep.
making millions of dollars overnight. People are going to an event and leaving with a $3 million winning. And I
Yep.
just think the esports gaming community as a whole is, it's something that's always been around, but it's finally getting the light it deserves. And I'm
Yep.
super excited to continue on this ride. And it's just gonna be, I mean, so much more fun the next 5-10 years.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And esports is very much spawning um, new and exciting things within gaming. Content creators and
Oh yeah,
live streamers and things like that. The industry is really starting to open up, and it's garnering the attention of traditional sports and business as well, which is only going to help it grow as it is in a fragile state. Getting that attention from traditional businesses is huge, and it really solidifies esports and gaming as a legitimate business moving forward.
yeah, I totally agree. It's been, I, I wish I had the analytics and like the true numbers of like where specific esports titles face against your traditional sports
Hmm.
genres, along with like the esports industry viewership compared to the traditional sports
Right.
viewership, both in the US and like worldwide, because I feel like they have to be right there with each other, but obviously nobody will ever know. Those numbers are always super inflated one way or the other, um, but I feel like it's up there, so it's going to be a
Yeah.
fun couple years to say the least.
I mean, the thing that esports does better than any traditional sport, I wouldn't say that esports is kind of up there with the MLB and the NBA and the NFL, just because the unlimited resources that they have. But the thing that esports does better than all of them, probably put together, is leveraging social media.
Oh yeah.
The particular personalities on the teams and the organizations themselves have really taken to social media to help advertise and grow their audience. And it's just where the world's attention is right now, is social media. And I feel like a lot of traditional sports have been lacking in that department because they've been able to lean on television and radio and things like that for so long. They're just a little slow to the social media uptick, and esports has been all over it since the beginning. And I think that's why you've seen such a dramatic growth chart for esports, because they're where everybody is right now, which is on social media. So, as long as that trend continues, and there is smart people at the top of esports that know how to drum up the attention that they are right now, I think it will continue to be successful, and probably surpass a lot of these leagues very quickly. I would definitely say esports is bigger than NHL. It's
Yeah.
bigger than MLS. It's not on the global stage that, like football, or football, those kind of thing, those big sports, NBA,
Hmm.
and football and soccer. I wouldn't say they have surpassed them, but they're definitely in the conversation.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And like, I guess the way it's scaling up, like I'm super interested to see where, like, if we had this exact conversation 10 years from now, how either neck and neck it would still be, or how far ahead esports will be, or how far esports could have dropped off, or whatever it is. So I like, I, the conversation now, the past like probably year or so up until now has been very much like it's there, it's going to pass, blah blah blah. People are like, having that conversation, but I'm like, I think in 5 years it's going to be a clear differentiation, just solely due to the fact that everybody in esports came up on social media. And if you didn't, it's like you're just on the cusp. You understand social media. It's there. You're starting to see the value, whatever. But then you look at the traditional sports side of things, like you said before, they leaned on television and back in the day radio, for the distribution. So people just naturally, there was only so many things that were available to be on television and on radio with the cost that it incurred. So they never needed to do anything else. So I guess another thing that this is kind of unrelated to esports, but in traditional sports, the teams that are starting to kind of acclimate to social media and being more relevant on those platforms, I think are gonna, they may not have had a big fan base prior, but I feel like some of these teams are gonna start getting on these platforms and getting a whole lot more notoriety because they were one of the first movers from a traditional sports standpoint. Like obviously they're on it, but I don't know. Social media and sports, I think, is gonna, I don't know.
It's funny to me
Change.
because it seems like sports of all of the major industries is furthest behind on this particular curve.
Yeah.
Um, you know, Given that most major sports rely on drumming up interest from the youth, you think that their focus would be on where the youth is at, which is definitely social media.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you see that particularly in the music industry, how many recording artists and bands and things like that get their start on social media and then eventually grow into being these mega stars. You know, there's a lot of guys like like Kanye and Drake and Post Malone and even Ariana Grande. She more got her start through television and acting and things like that. But Lizzo
Mm-hmm.
is a recent one where they really
Oh
they
yeah.
really utilize social media to gather this sort of cult following, and then they took that following and penetrated that upper echelon with your Beyoncés and your Jay-Z's and Taylor Swifts and all those people. They really used their cult following to get the attention of the people that mattered in that space, and that's one thing that sports is missing. you know Back in my day when I was growing up in the 90s, Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods and, King Griffey Jr. and Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa. These guys were such mega stars that it felt like they were part of your daily life. But because sports has not evolved into the new industry, there's just not that much, aside from your guys like LeBron James and Kobe Bryant and, these kind of guys that have embraced social media. There's not those mega stars that draw you to the sport. And that is the most important thing about continuing the growth of your industry is having the attention of the youth and the world.
Yeah. I would say that probably the last athlete, and he has since come on social media. The last athlete that's probably gotten received and maintained a steady, like, true upper echelon fan base, like the GOAT status type guy, Tom
Hmm.
Brady. I like,
Yeah.
as much as I hate the Patriots, and like, I mean, Tom Brady will always be a top 10 quarterback all time probably. Um,
Hmm.
but he only got on Twitter, I think, a year ago this month, or maybe it's like next month, and everybody knows who Tom Brady is. He didn't need social media, right. But I think that this probably era of sports people, all sports athletes, not sports people, will be it. Like past this, everybody's going to be coming up with social media that they're going to naturally build that type of presence as a whole. So I don't know. I'd like to see. I think it'd be super interesting to see if an athlete can come up and build that fan base without social media again, if that ever is to happen. That'd be kind of crazy.
I just don't see it happening because the youth who are gonna be the superstars of the future, they're all on social media.
Yeah, that's true.
Unless they're in some third world country where it doesn't exist, they're all there right now. They're all living their lives on social media. So, I think as that next, sort of group of megastars comes up, I think they'll be bigger than previous stars because they have a following in and outside of sports, and their talent as athletes will drive that fan base up, and hopefully drive interest to their sport, whichever they decide to go with. But that does beg the question: is it too late for traditional sports? If you ask kids in middle school and junior high right now, they want to be YouTubers and gamers and streamers. Yep. Because it's what they're interested in more than being an athlete. My son the other day, they did a little thing at school, and they asked him, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And he said a YouTuber. And it's an actual viable career path now, and that is due in large part to social media. I mean, YouTube itself is a social media site, so
I mean, I think it's not as obviously as unheard of that kids want to go that route now, and I think it's crazy that that's even a thing, because you said back in your day growing up in the 90s, same. Like I the first time I heard of YouTube, it was like, oh, this is cool, like I could see a viral video here and I don't have to find it or anything, like it's just going to be probably here. And then I found out, oh, you can make money on this. I never really got past that because I never really knew what I wanted to do or how to create content on YouTube. But it was like, people, when you start to piece that together, that there's so much attention on a platform like that, and then one thing leads to another. I never would have expected that people are making multi-million dollars a year just creating content and producing videos and putting them out to their own community. And I think it's great. So I mean, it just opens up a ton of career paths for a ton of different people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I covered all my topics that I was interested in bringing up in this episode. Was there anything that we breezed over too quickly or that we did not cover that you wanted to talk about?
No, I mean, I think we covered a lot of the questions that I get on a daily basis. More often than not, the question that I get is, how do I get more business, or how do I create more of a following on social media? And where I'm not an expert in that, I just think it's about networking.
Oh yeah.
And not networking for the gain of a business. I mean, truly going out, meeting people, building genuine relationships without the expectation of something in return. I think if you're legitimately a good person who cares about other people, and you're able to build relationships with people based on you truly want to get to know them, and not, hey, you're a business owner or somebody that I can benefit from, truly somebody that is just interested in building relationships. I think that is the key to being successful in esports, in design, in basically any career path. And it's a skill that that a lot of people could benefit from working on.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. There are, being in the industry the 5 or so years that I have been. There's a lot of relationships that I had early on that I maintain to this day. Um, but there are also relationships that I've made a few years ago that have just been strictly relationships and have turned into business relationships, not necessarily for my gain, but for their gain, and vice versa.
Mhm.
So building a relationship strictly for the fact of like making friends, or like building your I guess networking, your connection pool is great,
Mhm.
but definitely can't walk into that with the mindset of how do I sell to this person in a week. It's all about the
Right.
long game, and I guess building your personal brand, or like just like building connections
Yeah.
and networking. I think is great overall, though. I agree.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to open up Pandora's box here, but you're in a position of some authority, right?
Oh
You
yeah.
run a successful business, you have connections across esports that a lot of people could benefit from, and I'm kind of in the same situation as you are, and for me at least, I don't know if this is the same for you, but I can tell whenever somebody is just hitting you up to benefit them strictly. You can just tell by the way the conversation is going, where you're like, okay, you know, here sooner rather than later, they're going to ask me for something, right?
Oh yeah.
Um, and so that's why I always caution people when you're networking, make it about learning more about that person and more about what they're about, and sharing in their interest and creating a true friendship with that person, with no expectation that it's going to evolve into a business transaction. If you do that, not only will more than often those things um, will evolve into partnerships, because people want to work with people that they like.
Oh yeah.
You can even get away with not being the absolute greatest artist or player or whatever, just by being a genuinely likable person. uh, and I think that is something that a lot of people don't value that much, that they really should.
I Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. That's I think like the word relationship is kind of loose here. So like from a non-business relationship, a true person-to-person relationship, I agree, super super important. So like that should be the main focus, and what could you do
Hmm.
with, not necessarily what can they do for you. I think are big things to think about in those networking,
Hmm.
initial friendship building, relationship building conversations. So I think I agree with you. I think that's definitely a great mindset to follow when building relationships in whatever niche you're in. I think that goes everywhere, not just esports.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, there is going to be some situations where you enter into a relationship and it's strictly a business transaction,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They hit you up, they need something that you do, and afterwards you may never hear from them again.
Hmm.
I'm not saying that you have to be best friends with everyone uh, in every situation. There are business relationships, but it shouldn't be your number one priority, especially when you're just contacting somebody for the first time, right?
Yep.
If I were to drop into your DMs today and be like, "Hey man, what's up? How's things going? That's great. That's great. Hey, give me some free jerseys."
Yeah.
That's not gonna. That's just never ever gonna work, right? So it's just being a true genuine person, and maybe you're the kind of person who's not like, I care about everybody and I want to see everybody succeed. You don't have to be that way either. But thinking about other people and you know taking part in their success and being truly like happy for people whenever they succeed, people value that a lot.
Yeah.
And it's not something that you see, especially in the business world, where somebody is truly like excited for somebody else to succeed, right?
Yep. Yeah. You're right. You definitely don't see that a lot. So I mean, I feel you there. I I can't even say that I get super, super excited to see other people succeed. Like, obviously I want all my friends to succeed in everything that they're doing and all the people that I have relationships with. But you know, I guess it's just because nobody sees, nobody values other people's success as much as they value their own. And maybe that's a not great mindset to have, but I mean, maybe that's something I can focus on this year, being more supportive of other people who are succeeding, because there's a lot of people that are doing well right now, and I, you know, am happy for them. I just, maybe I don't voice it.
Mm-hmm.
Something to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I know that you're a fan of Gary Vee,
Massive fan.
and I am as well. And one of his philosophies that really resonates with me is there's plenty to go around.
Yeah.
Right now, the world has never been in a better place economically than it is right now. And getting upset because somebody took a client from you, or somebody is doing better than you in a business, there's room for everyone to succeed. It's just that type of environment right now where you can either be happy with people succeeding and use it as motivation to improve yourself and generate your own success, because you do have to generate success. It's not going to just fall into your lap. um, you can either use it as motivation, or you can let it and destroy yourself. So I'm much more on the other side of, yeah, this person is succeeding, or they're doing better than me, or they have a nice car and a nice house, and I want that. But there's also room for me to succeed, and there's plenty to go around right now, and especially in the esports industry, there is plenty of clientele. There's plenty of people that can benefit from your service and your skills and your talents. You just have to show them that you're worth it, right? So, don't get down, or try to put other people down to lift yourself up, because that is always going to fall short in the end.
I agree. I agree. And I also think that is a perfect place to end this.
We got kind of deep there.
Yeah, it definitely got deep. But before we end it, arguably the most important part of the podcast is the plug portion of it. So if anybody either wanted to get a new website done, or they just wanted to pick your brain on some things about developing, or any type of graphic design, whatever, what would be the best place to get a hold of you?
So business related, you can go to ember.com, contact form, and also you can schedule an appointment to meet with me. Any appointment that you set with the company right now will be with me. So 100% of our clientele goes through me first right now. So if you want to get a hold of me for business related purposes, emberwebs.com is the place to do that. If you want to engage with me, or pick my brain, or talk to me personally, Twitter is 100% the best place to contact me. My DMs are always open, or you can @ me at Nicholas Teters, and I'd be happy to help anyone who is a designer or developer, or wants to get into esports or anything. My knowledge is pretty limited to esports and gaming and development and design. So outside of that, maybe I'm not the best person to contact, but if you have specific questions about that type of stuff, I'd be happy to donate my time to help anybody out that I can.
Awesome. Well, be sure to hit him up, chat whatever you think is worthy of you chatting with Nick about. Do that. But other than that kind of brings us to the end of this episode. If you made it this far, all the way through, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to the whole episode. Be sure to follow or subscribe, depending on the platform that you're listening to. That way you get notified of the next one. But other than that, I will catch you in the next one.